Hi guys, we are back to once again identify the best head coaching job in the NFL. There are 6 openings, and like I did last year, I came up with a very patented, specific, highly technical system to analyze which of these jobs have the best and the worst attributes. As a reminder, when I did this last year, the team that came out on top was the Washington Commanders, who are still alive in the playoffs as of this recording. After that, it was a tie between the Falcons, Chargers, and the Seahawks. So I think the system works. All right, let's dive in. So here are the 6 jobs. We've got the Jets, Jags, Raiders, Saints, Bears, and Cowboys. Now that the Patriots job has been filled, I actually thought that was the best job, but it's off the table. And I have a 1 through 5 ranking for 3 categories that I will then add up: quarterback, roster, and then etc. Etc. includes things like cap space, draft picks, ownership, expectations. So it's a lot. Let's see how this goes. All right. So first, we're going to start with the Jets. I'm going to go 1 for quarterback. At the moment, we don't know who the New York Jets quarterback is, whether or not they hang on to Aaron Rodgers. If they do, it would be a large cap hit beyond this year. It would be painful to walk away. I think that they should, but they have the 7th overall pick, and I'll say this now so they don't have to repeat it 1,000 times. Not a very quarterback-rich draft, not many options in free agency, so it's a pretty tough situation for a team that doesn't have many good answers. I'll be a little more generous, though, with roster. I'm going to go 3 out of 5. Now, I know that it didn't look great at the end of the season, but they still have a lot of young talent. Obviously, Garrett Wilson. I think Sauce Gardner can bounce back with the right coaching. Quinnen Williams up front. Will McDonald, their edge rusher, broke out this year. They can save some cap space, by the way, from moving on from Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard. So they might actually have a little bit more room to work with than people think. Finally, etc. I'm going to go 2 out of 5. If Rodgers leaves, and this would all be different if he's still there, by the way, you do have kind of that new, fresh start, but Woody Johnson, or should I say Brick Johnson, maybe not the best bosses. And obviously, this is a very tough market to coach in. So 1 + 3 + 2 gives them a total of 6. All right, we'll see. Probably not the worst, probably not the best. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I'll start with quarterback here. I'm going to go 4 out of 5. And I know people are watching this at home, and they're going to say, Trevor Lawrence isn't a 4 out of 5 quarterback. I'm not saying he is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, although we have seen him hit that ceiling before. I am saying for an open job, at least you have a settled quarterback position with a guy who has played at a very high level in the past. And I think perhaps with better coaching, better infrastructure, could get there again. I am not all out on Trevor Lawrence. Roster, I am, however, a little bit more skeptical of. I'm going 2. So you have resources there to improve it. You have the 5th overall pick. Guess a decent amount of cap space, not a ton, actually, now that I look at it. You're about 17th right now. You can release Christian Kirk and move on. But you have young talent. I mean, Brian Thomas Jr. looks like maybe the best wide receiver in this entire draft, which is unbelievable. Evan Ingram's still there. Travis Etienne. On the other side, you have Josh Hines-Allen. That defense, though, really needs a lot of work, particularly on the back end. Also, the offensive line, I have some question marks. So, etc. for the Jags is a little tricky because, on one hand, it's not great. You are saddled with the GM, Trent Baalke, who honestly, a lot of us are surprised is still there. Ownership is, I guess, loyal in the Khan family, maybe to a fault with Baalke. They did insinuate that a new coach might be able to just find a new GM, which is interesting. However, I think that's counteracted by the fact that you get to play in the AFC South. So for that reason, I'm going to give them a 3. 4 + 2 + 3 brings us to 9, which is pretty damn good, I would say, for the Jags. I think the winning score last year for the Commanders was 12, and then it was a bunch of 10s, but all right, moving on. The Raiders. Ooh, okay. So quarterback, again, there's no one on the roster. You do have an advantage over the Jets in that you don't have the Aaron Rodgers question. You have a ton of cap space. Actually, just looked this up. $97 million, which is the second most in the NFL. So that you automatically have resources to work with in addition to the 6th overall pick, which is why, I'll factor then to etc. Roster, unfortunately, a lot of questions. I'm going to go 2. Brock Bowers, slam dunk pick. already one of the best young tight ends in football. Jacoby Myers is still there. He's good. Offensive line, decent. Some holes, but some good players. Jackson Powers-Johnson, who they drafted this year, was pretty good. But defensively, that secondary, a lot of work is needed. Christian Wilkins was hurt this year. He'll bounce back. You still got Max Crosby. But I'm going to put all that cap space here in at 4 for et cetera, because it is actually a decent situation to walk into. I don't think they're going to move on from you super quickly because they just did that with Antonio Pierce. Tom Brady is involved now, for better or worse. It seems like for better. So total, we're going to go 7, which is better than the Jets, but worse than the Jags. All right, moving on to, this one I feel bad, the Saints. Okay, so the Saints, as I think everybody knows by now, have maybe the worst cap situation, not just in the entire NFL, but in like the recent history of professional sports. But we're going to start with the quarterback. So I did look at the cap recently to kind of just see, or I looked at Derek Carr's contract, and I don't know how Saints fans feel about this, but I don't think it's likely that they'll move on from Derek. I could be wrong, but it would be, I don't know if it would make much sense from a cap perspective. And I'm going to give them a 2 here because Derek Carr, well, you know what? I'll bump that to a 3. I mean, he's really not that bad. I know that you'd obviously want to improve upon him and go younger and whatnot, but I just don't see that happening. At least you can get competent quarterback play out of Derek Carr. Less so the roster. I mean, this roster is just really old, really needs talent on both sides of the ball. So that's going to be a 1 for me, and then it's going to be a 1 for et cetera because of that cap situation. They do have the 9th overall pick. Yeah, the one thing I will say about the Saints is that maybe works in their favor. You know, they weren't actually as bad this year as some of these other teams. They had a point differential of -60, which is tied with the Bears and is not close to some of these worst teams. So at least there's, I think, improvement for a bounce back season for the new coach. I guess the concern there is just the absence of young talent. You got Chris Olave, who's had a lot of head injuries. Offensive line needs retooling. So that brings me to a 5 for the Saints. All right, moving on to the Bears. So this is a little more optimistic. I'm going to go 3 here for quarterback. I'm tempted to go higher because I do think you saw enough flashes out of Caleb Williams to be excited by him. But I do think also, you know, statistically, I mean, he just struggled so much. There's not a lot of precedent of quarterbacks starting with that kind of record and then bouncing back, although obviously we saw Bryce Young do it at the end of the year. I think it's appealing to, especially an offensive, just any head coach. So I'll go 3 there. And then I'm going to give him a 4 for the roster. I was looking at the depth chart before doing this and looking at both sides of the ball, and I just feel like there's so much talent there. And offensively, you know, DJ Moore, I think Real Madunze will be better than he was his rookie season. The offensive line, you got to fix the interior in part, but there's still good players. Defensively, it's a really good young secondary. Didn't have Jaquan Brisker for most of the season. Linebacker group took a step back this season, but I think they'll bounce back. You just need to get better at edge rusher, but the bones are there, I think, of a good roster. It's also a team where, I mean, it just felt very obvious to me that coaching was the problem in a lot of these big games, I think, which is a situation you want to step into as a head coach. I think the plus is that you have a decent amount of leeway. You have ownership that I know fans are unhappy with them, but I don't think they're capricious. And I think for a coach, that's desirable, even if it annoys the fan base. So those, I think, are good aspects of it. Obviously, it's a team that has been long suffering and really wants to win. But the downside to me is that you're in the NFC North, which is arguably the hardest division of football outside of maybe the AFC North, with all 3 teams making it to the postseason. So that dings it a little bit. So I'm going to even it out at about 3. That adds up to 10, which is pretty dang good. Finally, the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, so I'm going 4 here for quarterback. Same thing I basically said about Trevor Lawrence. You can quibble with it and his rank in the NFL. We're not here to do that. I'm here to tell you that he has played like one of the 5 best quarterbacks in football at points in his career last year. And again, for a first-time head coach or new head coach, probably maybe not a first-time one, that's pretty attractive, especially after I've talked through situations like the Jets, the Raiders, the Saints, right? Roster, how much cap space? Well, not a lot, but you could restructure Dak. I'm going to go 3 for roster. Is the Bears roster really better than the Cowboys? I'm going to change that. I'm going to go 4. 4 for the Cowboys. I do think unlike a lot, like you just have superstars on this team between CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons. I would argue Tyler Smith, Sir guard, falls into this category. You have like blue chip players, and then you have a lot of also A-, B+ players. Defense, they're just really injured on defense this year. I think you saw in the second half of the season when Micah Parsons came back, it's still a really good defense. Obviously, they need some beef on the interior. Defensive tackle and linebacker is a priority. And then on the other side of the ball, you need to run the ball better, and you need probably a secondary playmaker. But it's a good roster. I guess the only issue is you got to pay Micah Parsons, but I still think they could restructure some of the Dak deal and whatnot, and you have some room to play with there. So, etc. This one will be a little bit divisive because, right, yeah, I mean, it depends on kind of whether you think it's hard to work for Jerry Jones. In some ways, it is, because he is meddlesome and he is out there and he is very public. In some ways, though, it's not, because it doesn't seem like coaches actually have problems with him. I guess the downsides you get talked about on First Take every day. So I'm going to go 2 there, which also adds up to 10. Ooh, interesting. Okay, so we have a 2-way tie for the best head coaching job in football between the Bears and the Cowboys, followed by the Jags. Then we have the Raiders, the Jets, and then, unfortunately, the worst job is the New Orleans Saints. All right, that's it for now. We'll see how this holds up next season.